My siblings received luxury gifts while I got body wash for our birthdays, but now I'm moving out and everything is falling apart. For years, 27F, have felt overlooked and underappreciated in my family. My name's Charlotte, and I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. My older brother, James, 31M, and my older sister, Rebecca, 29F, were always the golden children. They were the ones who got the extravagant gifts, the praise, and the attention.
But me?
I was the afterthought. When I was younger, I used to dream of receiving gifts like the ones James and Rebecca would get. They would receive the latest gadgets, expensive clothing, and vacations, while I got, well, body wash. Not even a fancy brand, just the cheap stuff. Birthdays came and went, and my gifts were always underwhelming compared to theirs. My parents never saw anything wrong with it. They would say things like, "You don't need anything extravagant, Charlotte. You have everything you need." But I knew the truth. I was never as important as my siblings. As I got older, the disparity in treatment became more glaring. James got a car for his 18th birthday. Rebecca got a trip to Paris for her graduation. I got a book. I was happy to get the book, of course, but I couldn't help feeling bitter about the blatant favoritism. For a long time, I tried to push the feelings aside. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that material things weren't important, that family love was more valuable. But the truth is, it hurt. It hurt to see my siblings getting all the attention while I was left to fend for myself. Then came the day I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I was 25 when I had my breaking point. My parents had once again given me a cheap gift for my birthday. A bottle of body wash, just like the year before. I had never asked for anything extravagant, but this was just too much. I felt like they didn't even know me. They didn't care to know what I liked. I felt like a ghost in my own family. The tipping point came when I overheard a conversation between my parents and my sister, Rebecca. They were discussing what to get her for her birthday. "I think she'd love a new handbag," my mother said. "You know, the one from that brand she loves." My father agreed, and they both talked about how much they could spend on it. As I stood there listening, I realized they had never once asked me what I wanted. They had never bothered to consider my feelings. I was furious. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I confronted them that evening. I told them how I felt, how I had always felt invisible in the family, how I had never received the same love and attention that James and Rebecca had. My parents were shocked. They said they didn't know I felt that way. They promised they would make it up to me, but it was too late. I spent the next few months in a haze of frustration and disappointment. My relationship with my family was strained. Every time I saw James and Rebecca getting the attention I craved, it stung. I had always tried to be understanding, but this time, I just couldn't. The favoritism was too obvious, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I started to distance myself from them. I stopped going to family gatherings. I told myself I was just too busy with work and life to spend time with them, but in reality, I just didn't want to be around people who made me feel so insignificant. It wasn't long before I started thinking about moving out. I had always lived with my parents, but now the idea of living on my own seemed like the only way to escape the constant reminder of how little I meant to them. I began saving up money and looking for an apartment. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. I was tired of being the family's afterthought. One day, I told my parents I was moving out. They were shocked, of course. My mother was upset and tried to convince me to stay. "Why do you want to leave?" "We're family," she said, her voice full of concern. But I had made up my mind. I couldn't live in a house where I was always second best. My brother, James, didn't understand. "You're overreacting, Charlotte. They love you. You're just being dramatic," he said. He always had a way of brushing off my feelings, making me feel like I was just being too sensitive. Rebecca, on the other hand, was more supportive, but I couldn't help feeling that even her support had a hint of condescension. "You know, Charlotte," she said, "maybe if you hadn't made such a big deal out of it all those years, things could have been different." That stung, too. I had tried to make it work. I had tried to be patient, to let things go. But all those years of being overlooked had built up, and now I couldn't ignore it anymore. The day I moved out was bittersweet. I packed my things and said goodbye to the house I had grown up in. As I left, my parents gave me a sad hug, but it didn't feel genuine. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were only upset because I was leaving, not because they had treated me poorly for so long. I settled into my new apartment, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I had my own space, my own rules. I didn't have to worry about competing for attention anymore. I could focus on myself and start fresh. But as time went on, things started to unravel. My parents, especially my mother, seemed to struggle with the idea of me being independent. She would call me constantly, asking when I was coming home, telling me how much they missed me. She would even try to guilt-trip me into coming over for family dinners. "We're a family, Charlotte. We need to stick together," she would say. But the more she said it, the more I realized that she didn't really understand what it meant to be a family. A family wasn't about keeping up appearances or making sure everyone stayed in line. A family was about love, support, and respect, things I had never truly felt from them. James and Rebecca continued their lives as if nothing had changed. James bought a new car and threw a party to celebrate. Rebecca went on another extravagant vacation. And I sat in my little apartment, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. It wasn't long before I started to feel the weight of my decision. Being away from my family wasn't as freeing as I thought it would be. There were days when I would come home after a long day at work, only to find myself staring at the empty walls of my apartment. The loneliness was overwhelming. I missed having someone to talk to, someone to share my day with. But at the same time, I knew I had made the right choice. I couldn't keep living in a place where I felt invisible, where I was always overshadowed by the others. One evening, my mom called me again, her voice soft and apologetic. "I miss you, Charlotte. Why don't you come over for dinner? We can talk, just the two of us." I didn't want to go. I didn't want to fall back into the same pattern, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. But I also didn't want to be the one to cut all ties, to make it permanent. So I agreed. That night, I drove back to my parents' house. It felt strange, like stepping back into a life I no longer recognized. My mom greeted me with a warm hug, but there was something off about it. She seemed overly cheerful, as if she was trying to convince herself that everything was okay. Dinner was awkward. There were long pauses in the conversation, moments where neither of us knew what to say. My mom kept trying to talk about trivial things, how James was doing at work, how Rebecca was planning her next trip, but it all felt so distant, like we were strangers trying to make small talk. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Mom," I said, my voice shaky. "Why didn't you ever notice how much I needed you? How much I wanted to be a part of this family?" Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might finally understand. But instead, she just sighed, looking away. "I didn't know, Charlotte. I thought you were fine. You always seemed so independent. I didn't think you needed me." It stung. It stung in a way I couldn't describe. How could she not have known? How could she have missed it for all these years? "I needed you, Mom. I needed all of you," I said, my voice breaking. "But you were too busy with James and Rebecca. You never saw me. You never saw how hard it was for me." There was a long silence. I felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over me, and I wanted to scream, to let it all out. But instead, I just stood there, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I had been holding inside. Finally, my mom spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. I never meant to hurt you. But I can't change the past. All I can do is try to do better now." It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to heal the years of neglect, of feeling invisible. But it was a start, I suppose. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her anymore. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for what she had done. But I did know that I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to move forward, even if it meant leaving my family behind. The following weeks were a blur of conflicting emotions. I tried to focus on my work and my new life, but my mind kept drifting back to my family. My mom's words lingered, and the memory of our awkward dinner replayed in my mind. I was still angry, still hurt by everything that had happened. But I also wanted to believe that things could get better, that there was still hope for reconciliation. But it was hard. It was hard because the more I tried to move on, the more the weight of my past seemed to catch up with me. I started questioning everything, my choices, my decisions, my relationships. Had I made the right decision by leaving? Was I really better off on my own, or was I just running away from the pain? One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights, I felt a sudden wave of loneliness wash over me. I missed the comfort of having family around, even if they hadn't been the best family. I missed the familiar sound of my mom's voice, the way she used to call me to remind me to eat or check in to see how I was doing. It wasn't just the absence of my mom that hurt, though. It was the absence of a connection, the lack of feeling like I truly belonged anywhere. I had spent so much time trying to make my own way, trying to prove I didn't need anyone, that I had forgotten what it meant to rely on others, to let myself be vulnerable. It was then that I realized how much I had been hiding from the truth. I wasn't as strong as I thought. I had built walls around myself, walls that kept others out, walls that kept me from truly facing the pain I had been running from. I decided that night that I needed to confront my past, no matter how difficult it might be. I needed to face the hurt, the anger, the resentment that I had been holding on to for so long. If I didn't, I would never be able to move forward. The next day, I called my mom. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot, and I realize that I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time. I thought I could just leave everything behind and move on, but it's not that simple. I need to talk to you, really talk. Can we meet again?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then she spoke, her voice gentle. "Of course, Charlotte. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to realize how much you've been hurting. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I didn't know what to expect when I met her again. I didn't know if we could ever repair the damage that had been done. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep holding on to the pain and pretending that it didn't affect me. We met at a small cafe a few days later, and this time it was different. There was no pretending, no awkward small talk. We both knew why we were there, and we both knew it wasn't going to be easy. "I'm sorry, Charlotte," my mom said as we sat down, her eyes filled with tears. "I've been a terrible mother, and I've failed you in so many ways. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. I want to make things right." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long trying to convince myself that I didn't need her apology, that I didn't care anymore. But now, hearing her say those words, I realized how much I had been longing for them. How much I had been hoping for her to acknowledge the pain she had caused. "I don't know if we can fix everything, Mom," I said quietly, "but I'm willing to try. I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to keep holding on to all the anger and hurt." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start to heal. The following months were a slow but steady journey of rebuilding. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I felt like giving up. There were days when I couldn't shake the feelings of anger and disappointment that still lingered. But there were also moments of growth, moments where I could see progress, even if it was small. I began spending more time with my mom. It wasn't always easy, but I tried to be open with her about how I felt, to communicate in a way I hadn't before. She was trying too, though it was clear that her understanding of what I needed was different from what I had hoped. Still, we were both learning, and I was learning to accept her for who she was, flaws and all. One of the hardest things for me was letting go of the idealized version of the mother I had wanted. I had spent years waiting for her to change, for her to be the perfect mother who would always be there for me. But the truth was, she wasn't that person. She was human, with her own struggles and flaws, just like I was. I had to stop seeing her through the lens of my disappointment and start seeing her as a woman who had made mistakes, but who was willing to make amends. And in that realization, I started to find a sense of peace. But it wasn't just about repairing my relationship with my mom. It was about repairing the relationship I had with myself. I had spent so much time blaming her for everything that had gone wrong in my life that I had neglected the fact that I too had made mistakes. I had closed myself off from love, from connection, from the people who cared about me. I had pushed everyone away, convinced that I didn't need anyone. The process of forgiveness, both for my mom and for myself, was long and painful, but it was necessary. I couldn't move forward until I had let go of the past. I couldn't start building the life I wanted until I had freed myself from the chains of resentment. As the months went by, I found myself feeling more at peace with my situation. I had started to develop a new sense of independence, not just financially, but emotionally. I wasn't relying on my family to define me anymore. I had my own sense of self-worth, and I wasn't waiting for anyone else's approval. There were still moments of doubt, still days when I felt like I wasn't enough. But those moments were fewer and farther between. I was learning to trust myself, to believe in my own strength, and to acknowledge my own growth. Then one day, I received a call from my sister. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize now that I was wrong," she said, her voice shaky. "I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I'm sorry." It was a simple apology, but it meant more to me than I could put into words. For the first time, I felt like my family was truly starting to understand the impact of their actions. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't complete, but it was progress. And that progress meant the world to me. We talked for a while, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the distance between us. I didn't feel like I was fighting to be heard or understood. We were just two people trying to make sense of the things that had torn us apart. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I'm really glad we're talking." The conversation ended with a sense of tentative hope. We weren't healed, but we were moving in the right direction. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead. But as I looked at the life I had built, the progress I had made, and the connections I was rebuilding, I realized that I had come a long way. I wasn't the same person who had walked out that door months ago. I had grown, I had changed, and most importantly, I had learned to forgive myself and my family. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.